A lone rancher finds an Apache slave in the desert, never imagining she would stay with him. The sun was already high in the sky when Samuel Carter, a lone rancher, stepped out of his small wooden cabin. The air was dry and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush that stretched across the endless desert around his property. He squinted at the horizon, the heat making the distant mountains shimmer as if they were floating. Samuel had lived here for nearly 10 years, managing his modest ranch far from any town. Life had been hard, but it was honest work. He had learned to rely on himself, tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and facing the desert's harshness without complaint. Samuel's days were usually quiet, filled with the soft sounds of cattle lowing and the occasional whisper of wind through the scrub. He had grown accustomed to the solitude, the way it allowed him to think, to move at his own pace, and to find a rhythm in the slow passage of time. Yet, on this particular morning, a strange feeling tugged at him, a flicker of unease that he could not explain. Something about the desert seemed different, almost restless, as if it held a secret he was meant to discover. As he rode his horse along the dry riverbed, checking on a small herd of cattle that had wandered a little farther than usual, he noticed a faint movement among the sand and rocks. At first, he thought it was a lizard or a tumbleweed caught in the wind, but as he drew closer, he realized it was something far more unusual. A small, fragile figure was lying face down in the sand, barely moving. The sight made Samuel's heart skip a beat. He dismounted quickly, tying his horse to a nearby cactus. The figure, a young woman, was dressed in torn, dusty clothing. Her skin was sunburned and streaked with dirt, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. She appeared to be in great distress, her breathing shallow and uneven. Samuel knelt beside her, speaking softly, though he knew she might not understand his words. "Hey there! It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The woman stirred slightly but did not sit up. Her eyes, dark and wary, flicked toward him, full of fear and suspicion. Samuel could see the signs of exhaustion and suffering etched into her delicate features. She was clearly in desperate need of help. He gently touched her shoulder, careful not to startle her further. "You've been out here a long time, haven't you?" he murmured. For a moment she said nothing. Then, in a low, hesitant voice, she whispered a few words he could not understand. Samuel realized she was speaking Apache, a language he did not know. Even without understanding, he could feel the weight behind her words. The pain, the fear, the helplessness. His chest tightened with a mixture of pity and determination. He could not leave her there to suffer. With great care, Samuel helped her to sit up. She leaned against him, weak and trembling, and he supported her as he led her back toward his ranch. The journey was slow, but Samuel did not mind. Every step they took was a small victory, and he spoke to her quietly the entire way, hoping his tone would reassure her even if his words did not. When they finally reached the small wooden cabin, he offered her water in a cup and a simple meal of bread and dried meat. She ate slowly, as if still unsure whether she was allowed to take what was offered. Over the next few hours, Samuel watched her carefully. He wanted to give her space, to let her adjust, but he also needed to ensure she was safe and not in immediate danger. He learned that she had been taken from her home, forced to serve as a slave for someone else, and had escaped into the desert. The story made Samuel's chest ache. He had always known that the world could be cruel, but seeing it so plainly in the frail figure of this young woman brought a new level of understanding. Despite her fear and exhaustion, there was a quiet strength about her. She moved with a cautious grace, her eyes sharp and observant, as if every sound and shadow were a potential threat. Samuel admired this resilience. It reminded him of the cattle he raised, fragile yet enduring, always finding a way to survive in the harshest conditions. He felt a deep sense of responsibility for her, a bond forming that he could not explain but that grew stronger with every passing hour. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the desert with shades of orange and gold, Samuel prepared a small bed for her near the fireplace. She did not speak much, but she did not resist when he helped her settle in. Instead, she watched him with quiet curiosity, as if trying to understand who he was and what his intentions might be. Samuel felt a twinge of hope. Perhaps after everything she had endured, she would find some comfort here, however small. That night, the desert was alive with the sounds of coyotes in the distance and the rustle of wind through the dry brush. Samuel sat outside, staring at the stars, reflecting on the day's events. He had always been a man of action, practical and cautious, but this encounter had stirred something deeper within him. He realized that helping someone in need was not just an act of kindness, it was a test of character, a measure of one's humanity, and he knew deep down that he would do everything in his power to protect her. In the days that followed, Samuel's routine changed. He continued his work on the ranch, but he also dedicated time to caring for the young woman. He learned small ways to help her feel safe, offering gentle guidance and steady support. She began to eat more regularly, regain strength, and even smile occasionally, a rare sight that warmed Samuel's heart. Though they could not communicate easily at first, they found ways to connect. A shared gesture, a nod, a smile, or simply working side by side on simple tasks became a bridge between two very different worlds. Samuel discovered that patience and compassion could overcome fear and mistrust, and the young woman slowly began to trust him. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a broken fence, Samuel glanced at her and noticed the quiet determination in her eyes. She was no longer just a fragile figure in need of help. She was becoming a partner in survival, someone who could contribute, observe, and even teach him things he had never considered. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt a sense of shared purpose, a connection that went beyond mere duty. The desert, once a place of isolation and challenge, was beginning to feel different. With her presence, the harsh landscape seemed less lonely, less unforgiving. Samuel realized that life had a way of surprising even the most solitary souls. In saving her, he had not only given her a chance at life, but had also found a new dimension of his own existence, one filled with empathy, responsibility, and the quiet joy of companionship. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection. Samuel and the young woman would sit by the small fireplace, listening to the crackle of burning wood, the shadows dancing across the walls. They did not need many words. The silence itself was comforting, a shared acknowledgement of the struggles they had endured and the fragile hope that lay ahead. Samuel often thought about her past, the life she had lost, and the courage it had taken to escape. He marveled at her resilience and silently promised himself that he would never let harm come to her again. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them strengthened. She began to share small pieces of her story, fragments of memories and experiences that spoke of hardship, but also of an indomitable spirit. Samuel listened patiently, never rushing her, understanding that trust had to be earned and that true healing could only come with time. Life on the ranch continued, filled with hard work, quiet moments, and the slow, steady rhythm of the desert. But now it was shared life, and that made all the difference. Samuel had always known the value of hard work, but he had never fully understood the depth of human connection until he found her in the desert. In that moment, amid the dust, the sun, and the wide-open sky, two lives had intersected, and the course of their futures had changed forever. The days after her arrival were quiet but full of small, significant changes. Samuel had learned to move carefully around her, always aware of her cautious glances and sudden flinches. The young woman, whose name he still did not know, had grown stronger each day, her body slowly regaining its lost strength. She moved with more confidence around the ranch, her eyes taking in every detail, every tool, every sound, as if memorizing the land that was now her temporary home. Samuel worked alongside her, teaching her the tasks needed to maintain the ranch. He showed her how to feed the cattle, how to mend the fences, and how to handle the horses without startling them. At first, she performed these tasks clumsily, unsure of the rhythm, the weight, and the timing of each movement. But she listened carefully, never complaining, absorbing every word and gesture. Samuel admired her patience and determination, and he found himself quietly impressed by her ability to learn quickly. The language barrier remained a challenge. She spoke Apache, and Samuel spoke English. At first, this caused moments of frustration, as simple instructions had to be repeated or demonstrated until she understood. But over time, they developed a silent language, a way of communicating without words. A gesture, a nod, a look in the eyes conveyed understanding. Even without speaking, they could work together side by side, completing tasks that once would have required much more effort and explanation. Mealtimes were still cautious affairs. Samuel would prepare simple meals: cornbread, dried meat, fresh water, or sometimes milk from the cows, and offer them to her. At first, she ate sparingly, still wary of taking too much or being given food she might not be allowed to have. But gradually she began to eat more freely, and Samuel noticed small signs of life returning to her eyes. The lightness of hunger, the quiet comfort of nourishment. Sometimes she would look at him, her dark eyes reflecting something he could not name, and he felt a strange warmth in his chest. Despite these improvements, the young woman remained distant in many ways. She was polite and cautious, but she did not speak freely about herself. Her past, her fears, and her memories were carefully hidden behind a wall that Samuel knew could not be broken overnight. He respected that wall, understanding that trust had to be earned. He did not press her to speak. Instead, he offered his presence, his quiet companionship, and his protection, hoping that in time she would choose to share her story. Death to the turncoat! Some days the desert seemed alive with reminders of the dangers that had followed her. A hawk would circle above, or the wind would carry strange sounds from the distant hills. Samuel noticed that she would tense, her body rigid, and he would step closer, offering a comforting hand or a reassuring word. She learned to trust that he would not abandon her, that he would act when necessary to keep her safe. This trust grew slowly, measured in small moments of shared work and quiet understanding. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken fence near the edge of the ranch, a sudden windstorm kicked up the dust and sand. The young woman stumbled, and Samuel instinctively grabbed her arm to steady her. She looked up at him, eyes wide with surprise, and for the first time, Samuel saw a flicker of gratitude in her expression. "You saved me," he said softly, though he knew she might not understand the words. The tone, the gentle firmness in his voice, seemed to carry the meaning. She nodded slightly, a small acknowledgement, and returned to the work with renewed focus.
Evenings were the slowest and most peaceful parts of the day.
Samuel would build a small fire outside the cabin, and they would sit together in its warm glow. She often sat quietly, observing the flames, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes she would reach for a piece of bread or drink water, but mostly she remained silent. Samuel did not mind. He had learned that silence could be comforting, a space where both could feel safe without the pressure of conversation. Gradually, she began to speak in broken English, words appearing slowly, carefully, like fragile seedlings pushing through dry soil. "Water, more?" she would ask when thirsty. Or, "Fence broken," when pointing to the work ahead. Samuel would respond with a nod or a simple explanation, pleased by the small progress. Each word she spoke was a victory, a sign that she was beginning to feel at home, at least in the safety of the ranch. Samuel also learned to read her moods in subtle ways. A tense hand, a sharp glance, or a sudden withdrawal could indicate fear or caution. He adjusted his actions accordingly, never rushing, never forcing. Sometimes he would simply sit near her, performing his own chores, allowing her to observe him. This quiet presence became a foundation of trust, an unspoken promise that he would not leave her side and that the ranch could be a safe place, at least for now. As the days passed, small moments of connection began to appear. She would sometimes imitate the way Samuel fed the cattle or brushed the horses, her movements growing more confident each time. She began to smile occasionally, small, fleeting expressions that seemed almost shy but carried immense weight. Samuel noticed these smiles and felt a quiet joy, a sense that his efforts to help her were meaningful, that she was beginning to heal, even in the simplest ways. One morning, Samuel discovered that she had begun to take initiative. She had gathered water from the well and set up a small container near the horses. She was careful, precise, and attentive to detail, and Samuel could not help but feel a surge of pride. She was learning not only to survive but to thrive, and he realized that his role was no longer only that of a protector, it was also that of a teacher, a guide, and perhaps something closer to a friend. The young woman began to show curiosity about the world around her. She would point at objects, ask questions in her limited English, or gesture toward the distant mountains. Samuel would explain what he could, using simple words and gestures, enjoying the slow process of teaching and learning together. These small exchanges created a rhythm, a pattern that brought a sense of normalcy to their unusual situation. Despite these positive changes, Samuel remained aware of the fragile nature of trust. He knew that the outside world could still pose dangers. Slavers, Bounty hunters or others with cruel intentions might still search for her. He remained vigilant, keeping a careful watch over the ranch and the surrounding desert, always ready to act if necessary. The young woman sensed this protection and began to relax, gradually letting go of some of the constant tension she had carried with her. As they worked side by side, a quiet companionship developed. They shared responsibilities, the chores of ranch life, and moments of stillness. The young woman began to laugh softly at Samuel's occasional clumsiness or the antics of the horses. Samuel, in turn, found himself smiling more often, enjoying the sound of her voice even when the words were imperfect. Life on the ranch, once a solitary routine, had taken on new meaning and depth. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, Samuel watched the young woman collect firewood. Her movements were confident, precise, and full of purpose. He felt a quiet admiration for her resilience, her ability to survive and adapt despite everything she had endured. In that moment, he understood that their bond was no longer simply about protection or duty. It had become a connection rooted in respect, understanding, and shared experience. That night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke a few more words in English. "Thank Samuel," she said softly. The simplicity of the phrase carried immense weight. It was not just gratitude. It was acknowledgement, trust, and a step toward opening her heart. Samuel responded with a gentle nod, his own emotions stirring quietly. He understood the significance of the moment, recognizing that even small steps could lead to profound change. The desert around them remained vast and challenging, but within the small wooden cabin and the surrounding ranch, a new life was unfolding. The young woman, once lost and alone, was beginning to find her place. Samuel, who had lived for years in solitude, was discovering the value of companionship, patience, and quiet human connection. Together, they were learning that survival was not just about enduring the harshness of the land, but also about trust, empathy, and shared effort. Days turned into weeks, and the young woman grew stronger, more confident, and more comfortable in her surroundings. She began to laugh more freely, speak more words, and even take initiative in daily tasks. Samuel continued to guide her, support her, and protect her, but he also began to see her as a partner, someone who could share in the responsibilities and joys of ranch life. Life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm marked by work, quiet reflection, and moments of connection. Samuel found himself looking forward to each day, not just for the work, but for the company of the young woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. The bond they had formed, fragile at first, had grown into a quiet, steady trust that neither of them had expected but both deeply valued. Through patience, understanding, and shared effort, the young woman was no longer simply a guest or a figure in need. She had become part of the ranch, part of Samuel's life, and part of a new chapter that neither of them could have imagined when she first appeared, weak and weary, in the desert. In the harsh, unforgiving landscape, they had discovered a small, enduring world of safety, trust, and quiet companionship, one that would shape the days to come and prepare them for challenges and joys yet to unfold. The days on the ranch had grown more settled, but Samuel knew that the outside world could never be fully ignored. Life in the desert was harsh, but it was predictable. People, on the other hand, were unpredictable, and some could be cruel. Even as the young woman grew stronger, learned the routines of ranch life, and began to trust Samuel, he could see the subtle signs of caution in her eyes whenever the wind carried sounds from distant trails, or when a horse neighed unexpectedly. One morning, Samuel awoke to find the desert unusually quiet. The usual hum of insects and the distant calls of birds were missing. He stepped outside, squinting at the horizon. Something felt off. He scanned the hills and valleys, looking for any sign of movement. It was then that he noticed faint footprints in the dust, leading toward the ranch. They were too large and deliberate to belong to animals. A shiver ran down his spine. The young woman standing nearby followed his gaze. Her body stiffened, and for a moment Samuel could see fear flash across her face. She whispered a word in Apache, and though he did not understand the meaning, the urgency in her tone was clear. Samuel moved quickly, gathering supplies and preparing for the possibility that someone might be coming for her. He could not allow her to be taken or harmed, not after all she had endured to find safety. Hours later,
A group of men appeared on the distant trail.
They were mounted, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they rode closer. Samuel's heart tightened. These were not travelers. Their posture, the way they rode in formation, and the intent in their movements spoke of purpose and danger. He led the young woman into the small cabin, barricading the door as best as he could. She looked at him, her dark eyes wide, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed genuinely afraid. Samuel's mind raced. He knew he could not outrun the men. The desert offered no cover for someone on foot, and his ranch was small and isolated. He needed to think strategically. Moving quietly, he explained in simple English what she should do. Stay low, remain silent, and trust him.
She nodded, her fingers clutching the edge of the table.
He could feel her trembling. The men approached the cabin, shouting in a language Samuel did not fully recognize. Their voices were harsh, demanding, and unyielding. Samuel realized they were searching for her. They had likely been tracking her escape, determined to reclaim her. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would only make the situation worse. Samuel waited for the right moment. He knew the terrain around the cabin well and understood how to use it to his advantage. Quietly, he moved to the side door, peeking out at the approaching men. He could see the young woman's fear mirrored in their determination, and he knew that they could not simply be reasoned with. These men were used to taking what they wanted, and they would not leave empty-handed. As the first of the men neared the cabin, Samuel acted. Using a combination of loud noises and clever diversion, he created confusion among the group. Rocks thrown to distant hills echoed like gunshots, startling the men's horses and causing them to scatter momentarily. The young woman watched in awe as Samuel moved with precision and courage, protecting her from harm without hesitation. It was a moment that cemented her trust in him completely. The confrontation lasted only a few tense minutes, but to Samuel it felt like hours. When the men finally regrouped and rode away, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, Samuel exhaled deeply. He turned to the young woman who had been silent the entire time and saw relief flood her features. For the first time, she smiled fully, a smile that spoke of gratitude, admiration, and a quiet, deep trust. Samuel returned the smile, feeling a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief and pride. That evening, as the desert cooled and the sun dipped behind the mountains, Samuel and the young woman sat outside the cabin. The events of the day hung heavy in the air, yet there was a sense of triumph as well. They had faced danger together, and together they had prevailed. The young woman reached for a cup of water, and Samuel handed it to her, careful to meet her eyes with a reassuring gaze. She nodded silently, acknowledging both his protection and her own resilience. Days after the incident, Samuel remained vigilant. He fortified the cabin, repaired fences, and set up small warning systems using rocks and mirrors to signal any approaching travelers. The young woman began to participate in these preparations, her confidence growing as she realized she was capable of contributing to her own safety. She learned to read the desert, the way the wind shifted, the patterns of animal tracks, the signs that indicated approaching footsteps. Samuel watched her with quiet admiration. She was learning not only to survive, but to anticipate, to act, and to protect herself. The external threats were not the only challenges they faced. The young woman was still haunted by memories of her past, years of forced labor, cruelty, and fear. Some nights she would wake screaming softly, her hands trembling, her body tense with remembered terror. Samuel would sit beside her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder, or simply keeping her company until she calmed down. He did not try to speak over her pain. Instead, he offered silent support, understanding that true comfort sometimes came without words. Over time, the young woman began to share fragments of her story. She spoke of her family, the home she had been taken from, and the hardships she had endured. Samuel listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that these stories were painful and that sharing them required immense courage. Each word she spoke deepened their connection, building a bridge between their worlds that could not easily be broken. Despite the lingering dangers and the weight of her memories, life on the ranch continued. They worked together, tended the cattle, repaired fences, and prepared for the changing seasons. The young woman's confidence grew, and Samuel began to see her not just as someone to protect, but as a partner, someone who could share in the responsibilities, the hardships, and even the quiet joys of ranch life. Occasionally, travelers would pass nearby, and the young woman would tense instinctively, hiding or retreating behind Samuel. He reassured her each time, explaining that not all people were threats, and slowly she began to relax in their presence. These moments became lessons in trust, patience, and discernment, teaching her that while the world could be dangerous, it could also hold kindness and safety. One afternoon, while working near the edge of the property, Samuel noticed signs of recent activity. Footprints, broken branches, and disturbed sand. He and the young woman followed the tracks cautiously, discovering that a small group of men had been scouting the area, perhaps looking for her. The realization was chilling, but it also strengthened their resolve. Samuel taught her how to hide, to move quietly, and to remain alert, skills she absorbed quickly. Together they reinforced the ranch, preparing for any future threats with a sense of quiet determination. During these tense days, the bond between them deepened in ways neither had anticipated. The young woman began to rely on Samuel not only for protection but also for guidance, companionship, and the steady reassurance that she was safe. Samuel, in turn, found that he could rely on her resilience, her intelligence, and her growing strength. They had become a team connected by trust, mutual respect, and the shared experience of facing danger together. As the weeks turned into months, the desert around them remained vast and challenging. But within the ranch, a new life was taking shape. The young woman, once frail and fearful, had become strong, confident, and capable. Samuel, once solitary and reserved, had discovered the value of trust, companionship, and shared responsibility. Together, they navigated both the harshness of the land and the lingering threats of the outside world. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they sat together outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of red, orange, and purple. The air was warm but gentle, carrying the scent of dry earth and blooming desert flowers. The young woman leaned slightly against Samuel, a silent acknowledgement of their partnership and the safety they had built together. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only calm, trust, and a quiet happiness that spoke louder than words ever could. Samuel reflected on everything they had endured, the dangers, the fears, the challenges of building trust, and the slow, steady progress of healing. He understood that life on the ranch would never be completely free from risk, but he also knew that together they could face anything. Their bond had been tested and had grown stronger with each trial, a testament to their resilience and shared determination. The young woman, too, felt the depth of their connection. She had come to the ranch alone, uncertain and afraid, and now she had found a place of safety, a companion she could trust, and a sense of purpose. She understood that life would always hold challenges, but she also realized that she was no longer powerless. She had agency, strength, and the support of someone who genuinely cared for her well-being. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and danger, had become a place of growth, learning, and quiet triumph. Samuel and the young woman had faced threats together, learned to rely on one another, and built a life that, while still vulnerable to the unpredictability of the world, was marked by trust, resilience, and shared purpose. As night fell and stars emerged, Samuel and the young woman sat in comfortable silence, knowing that the days ahead would bring new challenges but also new opportunities for connection, understanding, and hope. Together, they had faced the dangers of the desert and the threats of the outside world. Together, they had discovered that true safety and strength came not from solitude but from trust, partnership, and the courage to face life side by side. Life on the ranch had changed in ways Samuel and the young woman could hardly have imagined when they first met. The desert, once a place of danger and isolation, had become a home, a refuge, and a place of quiet strength. The young woman, who had arrived frail, fearful, and exhausted, had grown into a confident, capable presence. Samuel, who had spent years alone, had discovered the warmth of companionship, trust, and shared responsibility. In the early mornings, the desert was calm and still. The sun would rise over the mountains, painting the land with soft pinks and golds. Samuel and the young woman often began the day by tending the cattle together, their movements synchronized from months of working side by side. She had become skilled at managing the animals, feeding them, checking their health, and even calming them when they grew restless. Samuel watched her with quiet admiration, impressed by how far she had come. It was not just her skills that had grown, her confidence and independence were visible in every action. She no longer flinched at sudden noises, no longer shrank away from unexpected visitors, and no longer looked at Samuel as if he were the only source of protection. She had learned to trust the land, to understand the patterns of the desert, and to rely on her own instincts. Yet, she still valued Samuel's guidance, and he, in turn, respected her judgment and perspective. Their relationship had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect and shared experience. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence near the edge of the property, the young woman paused to look toward the distant hills. Her eyes were clear, and her expression calm. Samuel noticed a sense of pride and peace in her stance, a sign that she had truly begun to feel at home. He smiled quietly to himself. In the beginning, he had only hoped to keep her safe. Now he realized that she had helped him discover a new kind of life, one filled with connection, purpose, and quiet joy. The challenges of the past were not entirely forgotten, however. Occasionally, memories of fear, captivity, and loss would return, casting brief shadows over her spirit. During those moments, Samuel would sit quietly beside her, offering a steady presence rather than words. He had learned that patience and compassion often mattered more than speech, that simply being there could offer comfort that no explanation could provide. She began to lean on him in ways that were neither fearful nor dependent but collaborative, sharing her burdens and knowing that he would respond with understanding and care. Neighbors and travelers began to notice the changes as well. Word of a lone rancher and a young woman living together in the desert spread slowly. Some were curious, others skeptical. But Samuel no longer worried about opinions. He knew that the life they had built was genuine, rooted in trust and mutual respect. The young woman, too, had begun to interact cautiously with visitors, her confidence growing as she learned to assess intentions and act independently when needed. Together, they navigated the balance between caution and openness, always aware of the need for vigilance while embracing the joys of daily life. The young woman began to take initiative in small but meaningful ways. She planted a small garden near the cabin, tending to vegetables and herbs that would supplement their food. She cared for the chickens, collected eggs, and even mended her own clothing when necessary. Each task she undertook strengthened her independence and added to the sense of stability and purpose that defined life on the ranch. Samuel often paused to watch her work, marveling at her resilience and determination. The fear he had once seen in her eyes had been replaced by strength, pride, and quiet happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of pink and violet, Samuel and the young woman sat together outside the cabin. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of desert flowers and dry earth. For the first time in a long while, they both felt a deep sense of peace. No danger loomed, no urgent threats demanded attention. They could simply exist in the moment, sharing the quiet comfort of companionship. The young woman began to speak more freely, telling Samuel stories of her past, not the painful ones, but the memories of her family, her home, and her culture. She shared tales of childhood games, family traditions, and small joys that had once been part of her life. Samuel listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the glimpses into a world so different from his own. These stories created a bridge between their lives, connecting them in ways that went beyond survival or shared work. They were becoming family in the truest sense, united not by blood but by trust, respect, and shared experiences. As the seasons changed, life on the ranch settled into a predictable, comforting rhythm. The young woman had become an integral part of every task, from tending the animals to repairing structures to managing the small garden. Samuel, too, found joy in the shared effort, discovering that the work was lighter and the days fuller when undertaken together. They celebrated small victories, the successful birth of a calf, a harvest of vegetables, or a repaired fence that would protect the livestock through the winter. Each success strengthened their bond and deepened their sense of accomplishment. One chilly morning, Samuel awoke to find the young woman already tending the animals.
She had grown into the role with ease, moving confidently through the ranch and anticipating the needs of the livestock. He watched her for a few moments, marveling at how far she had come from the fragile figure he had found in the desert months before. The transformation was remarkable, a testament to her courage, resilience, and determination. He felt a swell of pride not just in her but in the life they had built together, a life marked by trust, mutual support, and quiet joy. Over time, they began to explore the desert together, venturing beyond the ranch to observe the land, identify water sources, and track the paths of wildlife.
These excursions strengthened their partnership, teaching them to rely on one another while appreciating the beauty and challenges of the desert. They discovered hidden springs, groves of trees, and valleys filled with wildflowers.
The young woman marveled at the desert's beauty, its harshness tempered by moments of unexpected wonder. Samuel found joy in seeing her delight, realizing that the land they had once feared could also bring happiness and discovery. The young woman's laughter became more frequent, ringing out across the ranch in a sound that was bright, unburdened, and full of life. Samuel smiled whenever he heard it, grateful for the reminder that life could be joyful even in the midst of hardship.
Together, they celebrated small victories, shared meals, and the quiet beauty of sunsets over the desert hills.
Their bond had grown strong, not through words alone, but through shared work, mutual trust, and the unwavering commitment to one another's well-being. Though life was peaceful, Samuel remained vigilant. The desert was still vast and unpredictable, and he knew that challenges could arise at any moment. He taught the young woman how to remain aware of her surroundings, how to respond to unexpected situations, and how to act decisively when necessary. She absorbed these lessons quickly, demonstrating a keen intellect and sharp instincts. Together, they were not just surviving, they were thriving, capable of facing whatever the desert or the world might throw at them. As the years passed, the young woman began to take on responsibilities that extended beyond the immediate needs of the ranch. She planned for future seasons, organized supplies, and even began keeping a small journal, recording her observations, discoveries, and experiences. This act of reflection helped her process her past while embracing the present, providing a sense of continuity and growth. Samuel watched her with quiet pride, understanding that she had truly become a part of the ranch and of his life. One late afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence near the edge of the property, the young woman paused to look at Samuel. Her eyes were calm, steady, and full of trust. "Home?" she said simply, gesturing toward the cabin and the land around them. Samuel nodded, understanding the depth of her meaning. This place, once harsh and unforgiving, had become a home because of their shared effort, mutual care, and the bond they had formed. It was more than shelter. It was safety, comfort, and belonging. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Samuel and the young woman sat outside the cabin, watching the desert stretch endlessly before them. The air was still, filled only with the quiet rustle of wind through the trees and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. In that moment, they felt a sense of completion, not as an ending, but as the culmination of a journey marked by courage, trust, and mutual respect. The young woman's past, filled with fear and hardship, had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had found strength, independence, and purpose in a place that had once seemed unforgiving. Samuel had found companionship, trust, and a renewed sense of life in someone who had arrived unexpectedly, bringing change and growth. Together they had faced challenges, weathered dangers, and built a life that was meaningful, safe, and full of quiet joy. As night fell, stars glittering across the desert sky, Samuel and the young woman sat together in comfortable silence. They did not need words. The bond between them was clear in every glance, every gesture, every shared task and quiet moment. They had created a world of trust, respect, and companionship, a sanctuary in the vast desert. The hardships of the past had forged strength, resilience, and an unbreakable connection between them. In the months and years that followed, life on the ranch continued with its steady rhythm of work, discovery, and quiet celebration. The young woman flourished, Samuel thrived, and the desert, once a symbol of isolation and danger, had become a place of hope, growth, and shared life. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic triumphs, but of quiet perseverance, trust, and the enduring power of human connection. Together they had discovered that home is not just a place. It is a feeling, a bond, a shared life built on trust, care.
In each other they had found strength, safety, and companionship. And in the vast, timeless desert, they had created a life that was truly their own, full of hope, quiet joy, and the promise of many sunsets yet to come.